All right, welcome to Colonial Outcast, everybody. Here at Colonial Outcast, we try and disseminate analysis as dispassionately as possible. But when discussing the healthcare situation in Gaza, even from a strictly clinical viewpoint, it's impossible to avoid the disregard of every red line Israel has crossed. Most notably, their violation of every international standard regarding the sacred status of healthcare facilities, their workers, and their patients. We have had Dr. Attallah on twice to describe how dire the situation is for healthcare workers, including targeted assassinations of doctors to intimidate all medical staff into abandoning their duties for their fellow Gazans. If you don't know, Dr. Attallah was a surgeon for the Al-Aqsa Hospital, which was the last fully operational medical facility in Gaza. I say was because, as many of you may be aware, Israelis have forced the evacuation of Al-Aqsa for an impending assault. This evacuation includes premature babies, who will no doubt struggle to live any longer under any conditions outside of a healthcare facility. Of course, this is all part of Israel's greater goal of eradicating any functions of civilization for the Gazan people and accelerating the genocide through disease. Dr. Attallah and his family were also forced out of their apartment and into tents along the coast, which are now being bombed. For obvious nefarious reasons, the West has turned a blind eye to these violations, such as the destruction of every medical facility in the Gaza Strip, the blockade on all critical medical supplies, the sabotage of medical equipment, the massacres and torture in Al-Shifa Hospital, and the most current crisis facing the Al-Aqsa Hospital. Getting a real glimpse of what it's like to work in the medical field requires medical personnel who have actually been there in this hell. So joining us today is Dr. Mohammad Abdelfattah. Dr. Abdelfattah is a Palestinian American critical care physician from Southern California and currently works at MLK Community Hospital in Los Angeles. He volunteered at the European Gaza Hospital in Southern Gaza in May and was present when the invasion of Rafah started. So, Doc, thanks for joining us. How you doing?
Thanks for having me. I'm okay, thanks.
So you were there in May, correct? Working at the European Hospital?
Yeah.
May 1st, you entered Gaza via the Rafah crossing through Egypt. The IDF invades Rafah May 6th and takes over the crossing. May 13th, original departure date delayed as unable to leave through Rafah. So you were delayed leaving. And May 13th, also, UN aid convoy was attacked on its way to the European Gaza Hospital, killing one UN aid worker. And May 17th, the U.S. Embassy evacuation from the European Gaza Hospital. So before I get into all the details, can you kind of take us through a visceral journey of what it was like arriving within Gaza as a physician yourself and your immediate impression, just looking at this through your POV?
Yeah. So again, thanks for having me. So it was a very long journey from Egypt, about 8 to 10 hours. It took us in total to get from Cairo into Gaza, and then into European Gaza Hospital, which is in southern Gaza. It's on the border of Rafah. It's in Khan Yunis technically. And so as soon as we showed up, it was in the evening time, probably around 7, 8 p.m. It was dark, and we were immediately bombarded with kids. Like as soon as our convoy arrived to the hospital and the doors opened, there were just kids everywhere. And they were just so excited to see us. They were giving us high fives. They were asking our names. And what struck me initially was how many there were. There were kids of all ages. And a lot of them were barefoot. A lot of them, their clothes had holes in them. They were torn. And you could tell they haven't bathed, a lot of them, for several days. They were all thin. They looked malnourished. But yet they were smiling. And this is all under sort of the drones, the loud sound of drones and the bombings that are happening just in the distance. And so that was the initial introduction or welcoming to the hospital. Just the amount of people there. They were there. When we arrived, they told us that there were 30,000 people residing at the hospital. So the hospital itself was a refugee camp. It wasn't just a hospital. It was a shelter, and it's a big hospital, but of course not enough to accommodate 30,000 people. And so there's families everywhere. Every inch of the hospital, there's families. There's kids running in and out of the hospital. There's women cooking in the hospital. There's doctors wheeling patients in the hospital. So it was a scene that I've never been exposed to. Never thought a hospital could look like this. And that was immediately sort of evident when I got there.
So walk us through the channels which led you into Gaza. How did you get connected with that mission? originally?
So I would say probably in November of 2023. So about maybe like a month after October 7th, I started volunteering. I started seeing calls for medical volunteers to join different organizations to do medical work in Gaza because there were a lot of casualties coming in. The doctors were overwhelmed. And so I put in my name pretty early. I didn't hear back for several months. I heard back in March 2024 that they needed help and that I had an invitation to join a mission and if I was interested. And I had a difficult discussion with my wife and two kids, and decided that this is something that I've always wanted to do. It was sort of I felt like the least that I could do, sitting back just watching, being so frustrated over here, not being able to help directly, and just seeing the constant daily destruction and killing of children, women, and so I had to do it. And so one of the organizations, Palestinian American Medical Association, or PAMA, reached out to me, and basically we flew from. I live in Los Angeles, so we flew from LA to Cairo, and then from Cairo we hopped on a convoy with all of our luggage and drove the 8 to 10 hour journey to. It's not typically that long, but there were a lot of Egyptian checkpoints in
Mhm.
between, and we were held up multiple times, and even crossing into Gaza at the Rafah crossing, the Egyptians held us for several hours, checking every single suitcase.
What's the motivation behind that with the Egyptians? What are the dynamics at play there
Motivation behind the holding us.
behind just holding you guys up? Um, the
Yeah.
bureaucratic sluggishness.
So
What?
it was felt immediately. So I'll tell you, as soon as I landed in Egypt, they were very not. They were not friendly at all. I mean, they were going through all my.
Why?
Why? Yeah, that's a good question. I think they're trying to intimidate people from coming. That they were getting a lot of volunteers. I'm not sure if there's also higher ups. Maybe the Israeli authorities are telling them to discourage, treat a certain way so that they discourage further doctors that want to volunteer or come to Egypt for this purpose. But as soon as I landed, I mean, they were going through all my suitcases. They pulled out hand sanitizer bottles that I brought, and they said, "What is this for?" I feel like they were mocking me, to be honest with you. Luckily, they didn't confiscate anything, but that was the feeling that I got while being in Egypt was that I was not like welcomed here. You're not welcomed here. I mean, multiple times were they questioning us, "Where are you going? Why are you here? Is this truly for Gaza?" And then stopped multiple times along the way, and at the Rafah crossing, they held us for several hours. So each of us brought 10 suitcases filled with supplies. We were able to bring everything that we could think of. We brought medications, we brought coloring books, we brought clothes, sandals, feminine hygiene products, anything that could help. We brought
Mhm.
with us. And so they checked every suitcase, and they did it twice. Actually, they did it one time. It literally took 2 hours, and they said, "You know what? We're going to do it again." And so I felt like it was just kind of like a way to humiliate us or put us through this difficult journey. I didn't understand the intentions. Maybe it was just I just assumed it was to discourage us from coming, to be honest, because it was completely opposite experience once we entered the Palestinian side in Rafah. They welcomed us with open arms. They literally went through all the luggage, but very quickly they helped us pick up our luggage. Whereas on the Egyptian side, each of us was responsible for picking up their own luggage, and we had a lot of suitcases. We had 200 pieces of suitcases, and so
Mm.
it was just it was night and day sort of experience, and it wasn't just me. I mean, everyone was it was very clear to everyone.
Uh, Within the strip, once you got in the strip, that other checkpoint, the ones who were more lenient, obviously. What was their background? Who's which group did they belong to?
So there was no clear like a name on their badges or their shirts who they were with, but I was assuming they were
Huh.
with some the government that's running Gaza.
Right.
Yeah, and I mean they were organized. They had a system there. They had conveyor belt with all the luggages. So they were very very organized. But I don't know who
Yeah.
exactly they were with. I didn't speak with them at all.
Interesting. This is very kind of shocking to me, especially with. I mean, I've heard horror stories coming out of Egypt. I do hear a lot of heavy suspicion that happens with people who travel within Egypt and arrive.
Yeah,
But what doesn't make sense is the aggression and the obvious like use of bureaucracy to try and stifle aid workers from going to Gaza, what possible motivation would they have against that unless there was some type of under the table agreement between the Israelis and the Egyptian authorities to say, hey, look, make it hell for these guys, anybody who wants to come, which doesn't make any sense why any Egyptian would cooperate with that type of
I mean,
agenda.
that's what I assumed. I mean, they're cooperating, along the border. It seems like it's the Israelis that are de facto running the Egyptian side.
Mm,
I even had we all had letters that explicitly explained why we were coming, and so I showed that to them as soon as I landed, and they still were very difficult. Um, but yeah, it's just part of the
that's
journey.
well, it's good that the audience is hearing all this to hear what it's like for you from point A all the way into Gaza, all steps of the way. What how difficult it is for aid just to get aid to Gazans. You would not think that humanitarian aid would be such um would be such an enemy number one. You know,
Exactly.
you would.
And I'll
It's
tell you,
bizarre, man.
one of the most frustrating parts of entering Gaza was as we were driving up to Rafah, you immediately see just massive trucks parked probably for miles. I kid you not,
Yep.
probably 30 minutes of large cargo trucks parked from like bumper to bumper for miles. Massive trucks with aid, and they've been waiting for weeks on the border
Mhm.
while we were there. And so I just remember thinking when I was in California trying to prepare for my trip, and how frustrated I was that I was limited by the airline weight limits for each suitcase, and I was trying
Mhm.
to pack as much as I can because I know everything was so valuable, and just
Mhm.
seeing those massive trucks that have much more aid that I could ever bring in myself just stuck there and that close
Mhm.
to the people that need them so desperately. That was very difficult to see and very frustrating. So
Yeah.
yeah, I think it's all very intentional in coordination with the Israelis to not let aid in, make
Mhm.
it a very very slow trickle. They were telling us some of these aid trucks once they finally enter Gaza, the food or the goods that are on there are expired or they're rotten. And so
Mhm.
it's just overall a very devastating situation. And this is not even talking about being in Gaza, which is like on another level catastrophic and disastrous.
Yeah, it's weaponized bureaucracies, with the intention of uh just suffocating Gaza as much as possible.
Mm.
It's interesting when you hear the Western media perspective and you ask like your average American, they'll tell you that, well, I see on the news they're letting aid in, so look how uh, look how much the Israelis care about Gazans. Who does that? But you don't see the full story about how, yeah, they're allowing aid in, but they're purposefully putting a bottleneck on that aid coming in to allow just enough to say that they are letting aid in and creating uh, um, a hectic situation for Gazans who are struggling to get the supplies.
Yeah, and it's definitely
So
not enough. It has not been enough. Yeah, just to make the claim that they're allowing aid in, absolutely. But it's definitely
exactly.
far from being enough. Even I saw that directly in the hospital.
So you enter in through Gaza. They take you straight to the hospital, to the European hospital, correct?
Correct. Yeah.
Where are they housing you?
So we were staying at the hospital on the compound. There was a college of nursing, a dorm
Hmm.
there. It's just probably a 5 minute walk from the hospital, and that's where we stayed. There's about 10 of us in a room, small mattresses, and
Right.
yeah, we stayed in there the whole time. So we were there for 16 days, and did not leave the hospital or the compound for those 16 days.
So you arrive in the hospital and you see it just packed to the rafters with patients and families, and you're saying a lot of them are there because it's the only place that they feel safe, right? That was the main reason. They didn't want to get sniped by Israeli snipers or bombed or you know
Yeah, so a lot of them have been evacuated multiple times, five, six, seven, 8 times already during this war, during this aggression on Gaza. But I'll tell you, I mean, they are there seeking shelter, but many of them told me there's no safe place in Gaza. They
Mhm.
know what happened at Shifa Hospital. They know what happened at Nasser Hospital. And then we saw that while we were there. There were evacuation orders happening in Rafah, as you mentioned when we started. Rafah invasion started while I was there, So there were leaflets being dropped in areas in Rafah to evacuate families. And so these families evacuated, and those areas ended up being targeted. And I specifically, there's a case that I'll never forget. There was a boy who left Rafah with his family after evacuation orders, and he went to Al Mawasi, which is a beach town. And on this particular day, it was hot. It was summertime. So him and maybe like 3, 4 friends went swimming in the beach because it's right on the beach. And so they're swimming, and they came under Israeli gunfire. And so they all started panicking. They were all swimming in different directions. And this one child got pushed to the bottom and he drowned. And so they brought him into the European hospital. He was blue, and you could see the sand in his hands and in between his fingers. And his dad was just distraught. He said, "Look, we followed their orders. They told us to leave, to go to Al Mawasi, and
Yeah.
still it wasn't safe there. How do we protect our kids? Where do we take them?" And that was just the overall theme. Multiple times did parents say, "How do I protect my child?" And imagine, like, I don't know if you're a father, but I'm a father, and like the most basic right of protecting your kids from harm, they're not able to do that. It's like so devastating.
Exactly.
Yeah.
I think about that a lot, actually. I am a father, and I probably wouldn't have the emotions I have regarding Gaza if it wasn't for me being a dad.
Yeah.
It I don't know how I don't know. It's hard to say what I'd be like if I wasn't a father, but I can tell you that like just seeing what these parents are going through, it's an it's your worst nightmare.
Absolutely.
Because like you said, it's every basic human right for a parent to protect his child and provide for his family.
Yeah.
And to see that stripped away, and it's very obvious that's weaponized against Palestinians in general. Israel has a special doctrine of using children as a weapon against their own parents and creating the horror and intimidation. And
Definitely.
it's the most evil thing you could ever imagine, you
I
know?
mean, that's what I saw. It's a war on children. This aggression on Gaza is an aggression on the kids of Gaza. I mean,
Mhm.
countless mass casualty incidents are just bringing in kids. Some of them dead on arrival, others with horrific shrapnel wounds, large gashes in their body where their intestines are coming out. There was a 1.5-year-old child who was sniped in the head. One of my colleagues was treating, and so even the ICUs. I'm an ICU doctor in Los Angeles, and I worked in the ICU at European Gaza Hospital. Majority of the victims in the ICU are kids, and they are in horrific condition. Burns, majority of their bodies, 70, 80% of their bodies, where those type of burns will not even you won't survive it in America in the best burn center. So even Gaza,
Oh,
it's a death sentence. And to see them slowly wither, like in pain, because we don't have pain medications to treat their pain, and for them to die after 1, 2 days of us doing everything that we can, it was just so devastating. And it was just the same story over and over. We would do our best to stabilize, but then within 1, 2 days they would die, either from infection or just succumb from complications from their wounds. And I'll tell you, the mortality was so high in the ICU. Like in America, in ICU mortality is it's single digits, whereas in Gaza, I
mhm.
would tell you probably 80%, maybe even low number 80, 90%. Like I saw very few success stories, patients that actually survived and left the ICU. Very few.
Well, who was the first patient that you treated when you arrived? And walk us through day one. Did you go to your housing facility first, unpack, and then head to the hospital? Was that the process?
So yeah, so as we got there, all those kids came and greeted us. We had a lot of suitcases with us, 200 pieces. So the kids were
Mm.
so excited to get to work. They formed like a conveyor belt, or like like a conveyor belt, and they basically, it was an activity. They started
A
passing.
fire brigade,
Exactly, fire.
bucket brigade. Yeah.
Passing our suitcases to each other all the way until they entered the compound. So it was fun to watch them unload the suitcases for us. It was an activity for them. For them, they don't get a
Yeah.
lot of visitors, and it's just bombs and drones in the air. And the compound itself is not very big, so there's not a lot to do for them. There's no school. They've been out of school for months. There's no routine in their lives, and so they're
Mhm.
wandering the hospital at all hours. I saw them. So I would say even when I was in the hospital late at night, like 1, 2 a.m., I'd still see kids walking around, kids playing soccer outside. So they have no routine. So any new individuals that come, they get very excited. And so yeah, they helped us unload our
Right.
bags. We went to our room. We ate. They had like a rice dish for us actually. So we ate, and then we went to bed the first night. The next day, I wanted to go check out the ICU. So I walked into the hospital and I actually went to the ER first just to see sort of see what the capabilities were. And as soon as I step foot, I just like look in the ER and I see a child about 2 years old. He's just holding his arm up, and it's just his arm is severely burned. You can see his skin just peeling off. He's crying like crazy. His mom is trying to console him, and just right next to him, there's a young child about maybe 6 months old who's screaming, and you see this huge gash in her foot. She has a huge shrapnel wound, and this was immediately as I stepped foot in the hospital. And I thought about my two kids. My two kids are the same ages. They're two
Yeah.
years and 6 months at the time. And so it was hard, honestly. To be honest, I had to leave. I told that there was a ER doctor, and I said, "Sorry, I can't help you. I can't." It was too hard. I was too emotional immediately to see that view. I thought about my kids immediately. So I
And you
left.
probably haven't seen anything. I mean, I don't know, throughout your career as a doctor, have you seen anything like that in the
Never, nothing,
States?
nothing like
Yeah.
this. The amount of
Yeah.
trauma that's happening in children, I have never seen
Mhm.
anything like this.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I left and then I went into the ICU and joined the ICU team that was rounding on patients. And I'll tell you, the Gazan doctors are so impressive. They are
Yeah.
so smart. I kid you not. I was sitting there just listening, and I felt like I was at some academic institution. I was like,
Mm.
hold on, am I in Berkeley? Like, where am I? Like, they were so impressive. Just them discussing patients and talking about management. And then, we just got to work, helping them, just trying to assist the local doctors. So obviously, they've been doing this for, at the time, it was 9 months straight. And so they
Yeah.
are pros. They know how to manage explosive injuries, burns, as best as they can. And so I was learning a lot from them. My goal was to try to give them any relief that I can, because I know how exhausted they were. They were going nonstop. For us, like after 2 weeks, we were exhausted. We were so tired. And so I was so impressed by these doctors who it's dangerous for them to come to work every day, who have
Yeah.
lost colleagues themselves, have been killed. They all have stories of colleagues that have been killed, arrested, tortured. Their lives are at risk just them coming to the hospital, and yet they came every single day. And like when you're working with them, it's not like they're just sitting there stressing out, crying, devastated. They are trying to crack jokes. They're trying to make you feel welcome. They're making tea and they want you to drink first. Like these people are on another level. Like I couldn't believe that, the amount of trauma that they've seen, for me, it was traumatic for 2 weeks, but them seeing this for 9 months, they were still able to function. They were still able to see patients and provide medical care. They're just so impressive. Every single one of them.
I know. I know. I'm always amazed. I've been in the medical field for a good, I don't know, 10 years, and I've you hear about like the um that numbness that medical workers often get here in the States,
Yeah.
where they tend to be desensitized to
Of course.
death, suffering, right?
Yes.
Um I don't that doesn't seem Gauze and doctors don't seem to be susceptible to that. It's a whole nother mentality they have, a whole nother philosophy. Of course, our medical workers in the United States, they don't see they see a fraction of a percent what Gaza is seeing.
Yeah.
And yet these medical workers in Gaza, just as you said, they're passionate every day, and every human life that they see lost is personally, it's personally impacted. It touches them very personal. So what do you attribute that to? I mean, I have an idea, but I want to hear
Yeah.
your answer.
Honestly, a lot of them I would attribute it to their faith. I mean, a lot of them are proclaiming verses from the Holy Quran, talking about patience, talking about sort of the rewards of those that are patient, the
Yep.
benefits of being patient, the rewards of a martyr, dying for in God's cause. And so
Yes.
that was one thing that was very obvious. Just a side story. When I was in the ICU, there was a mother who came in with after her home was bombed. It was a husband and a wife, and so we were treating the wife. She was in really bad shape, multiple limb amputations, severe burns, and her son came every single day to the ICU. And I remember the first day he said, "Look, doctor, I need you to keep her alive. You have to keep her alive because I'm responsible for four young kids right now, and it's a lot for me. I can't do this without my mom. And so, I told him we're going to do everything that we can. And every single day until she died, he came and checked on her. And so the last day, unfortunately, she passed from complications of her wounds. And, I was expecting to see him, and I was expecting sort of, just him to be distraught and crying and very emotional. But he came to me after he got the news. He came up to me and he brought dates, and he said, "Here's a date, and please take a date for my mom. I'm celebrating her martyrdom. I'm celebrating her the way she passed it, for God's sake."
Hmm.
And for me, I mean, I was like, man, these people, they will never be defeated. I mean, these people are celebrating the birth of their kids when they're born, and then when their kids are killed in God's cause or martyred, they celebrate their deaths as well. And so they're just so resilient, and I think a lot of it comes from faith. Absolutely.
That was my answer as well. The verse that says to save one life is to save the whole world is the
Yeah.
code that the medical staff in particular live by.
Yeah.
And you just don't see that everywhere in this planet. You don't see that. Like you said, they're the most resilient people I've ever witnessed. And it's just uh they should be put up on the largest on the tallest pinnacle in the medical field all over the world, you know?
Of course.
And yeah, I was gonna that was kind of touching on my next subject is the how pivotal faith is amongst the medical staff in Gaza, and yourself, you're Muslim,
Mhm.
uh, and did that, how did that drive you throughout that hell that you saw? I mean, did you pull a lot of their faith and take on a bunch of that faith into yourself and incorporate it in, like, as far as like what when you came to Gaza and when you
Yeah.
left Gaza, the difference, the night and day difference?
So, I mean, when I was in Gaza, I was obviously just blown away by how these people were surviving this horrific genocide and these traumas that they're seeing every day, and how they were using faith to get them through it. Yeah, and so that resonated with me absolutely. I remember just hearing, the statements that they're saying, the verses of the Quran that they're reciting, and just in my head thinking, like, I want to be this strong. I should be this strong. Like
Mm,
small things, issues that we have back home where we're blessed completely. Every aspect of our life is a blessing here. It's like it shouldn't bother me at all. I was like, I'm not going to let small things bother me. What's important is clear. We have a purpose for being on this earth, and I'm just going to cherish those things that are most important to me: my family, my friends, and my faith. Absolutely. And yeah, so it was great to learn that lesson and see it directly in Gaza.
what about the personal testimonies from these particular patients? Which of the patients, if you can give me some stories about particular patients that had an impact on you?
Yeah, I mean, every this has affected every person in Gaza. Every
Mm,
single one of them has a story. So
mm,
they're willing to share their stories if you're willing to listen. And for them, I felt like it was healing, like for them to just talk about sort of the experiences that they went through. There
mm,
was a young physician in the hospital who told me his story. He lived far away from European Gaza Hospital, and so instead of him traveling to the hospital. His family told him, "You know what? We want you to just stay at the hospital, like sleep there." A lot of the doctors ended up doing this, but they told him, "I just want you to just stay there for your safety." And so he was stayed at the hospital for a good 2 weeks. And he said he tried to call his family and couldn't get a hold of them for the 2 weeks. Finally, he got a hold of them, and he said he had such a great conversation with his mom and dad, and they were talking about how they had fish, which is so rare to have now, and they were saving it for him. Like they wanted to eat it when he came home. So the next day, he's on call. He's on. So they do 24-hour calls. Okay, and so he's on call, and while he's on call, his home is bombed. So his mom is killed, his dad is killed, his brother who was sleeping in his room is killed, and I think that he also had a nephew that was killed. And because he was on call, he did not get the notice. Like no, he didn't get the news. The news was not able to reach him because he was in the
mm,
hospital working. So he, one of the traditions back in Gaza is after someone is killed, you usually pray. You clean their body, you pray on their body, You pray for forgiveness, and then you bury them pretty quickly. So he didn't get the news, and he missed the burial of his entire family. And so
Jesus.
he, he was obviously telling me the story, and he was just saying how blessed he was that he had that last phone call. Like, he's like, at least, I had a phone call, and I was able
Yeah.
to talk to them before they passed. And it was crazy is he had a brother that was killed by the Israelis many years ago, like 5 years ago. And he said his mom had a dream during the war that his brother was welcoming his mom, like welcoming his mom, and she
Mm.
ended up dying in that war. And that was a tough story, because I'm looking at this guy and I'm seeing him, seeing patients, like he's still working in the hospital. I'm like, imagine this trauma. Like, you were at the hospital, you missed, the funeral. You could have been killed. I mean, the hospital, I guess, did save him. He was working, but just the association as far as like missing your family's death, at their burial, and you're still coming back to work. Like, he's still functioning. It was just very hard to hear that and grasp. I remember he's telling me the story, and I honestly broke down in front of him, and I was embarrassed. I'm like, I'm sorry, this is very difficult. And he's like, no. He's like, don't worry, they're in a better place, and I know that they're not suffering and they're not living through this genocide. So just seeing his strength, and it's not just him, man. It's literally all of them. They have
Yeah.
found a way to continue to move forward. And I'll tell you, I'm still in touch with them, and every day is getting harder for them.
Yeah.
Every single day that this lags on, there's
Yeah.
water, food issues. They're saying there's a big issue with shampoo and soap, and so hygiene is very difficult to maintain. There's the majority of the buildings are destroyed, so a lot of the doctors that I was working with, their homes are all gone now. They're living in tents on the beach. So it's hard for me even to text them or message them, hey, how are you? Because I know it's not going to be a good answer. So there's times
Yeah.
where I let several days go, because I'm like, how do I even initiate? How do I say, how are things, without knowing? I don't know, not being like insensitive to the fact that I know it's a disaster for them.
Yeah. I know what you mean. Just trying to, I guess, communicate with them and get some type of feedback on what their situation is. Like I try to do that with Dr. Altala. Every morning I'll check my messages he's always asking me how I'm doing.
Yeah, exactly. Same.
You know what I
Yeah,
mean?
how are
Like
you?
me,
I
I'm
know.
freaking in my bed, dude. I got my water bottle right here. How are you?
Every
Alhamdulillah. That's what he says. Alhamdulillah.
Alhamdulillah, every aspect of their lives, man. Charging your phone, finding a bathroom, washing your clothes, food, water, just quiet at night to sleep,
Yeah.
just safety, a roof over your head. There's nothing that's easy in their lives. Not one aspect of their lives is easy. Everything that we take for granted here in America
Mm.
is hard for them over there. And so that was very eye opening for me, and I appreciate. I mean, I think I do. I try to remind myself of how blessed we are all the time.
Oh my God, no, I know. Like how differently do we look at life now since October 7th, especially those who are concerned about Gaza.
Yeah,
It's made us more grateful. It's tugged on these heartstrings that we never knew we had, in so many ways. I mean, and it's all and you're in speaking of how life has gotten harder, it's what's so unique about this genocide compared to a lot of atrocities throughout history is that everything is so intentional. All the details, the fact that they try to, um, I don't know, like, sabotage the water supply,
yeah,
uh, allow a little bit of food in, just enough to create a hysteria
sure.
amongst a starving population,
Yeah,
the sniping of children while the parents are specifically holding them in their arms
yeah,
just to create that psychological terror that we can snipe your child while you're holding your child. I mean, the use of drones making these loud sounds so they can't get any sleep. Every detail
yeah,
is meticulously planned
it's true.
by Israel to make life as miserable and as much of a hellscape as possible. And it's unfathomable. That's what makes this so unique. So people, when I hear people say, "Well, there's death all around the planet. There's all kinds of bad stuff going on," and it's true. We have what's happening in the Congo and Sudan,
Yeah,
and all that's relevant and all that we need to focus on. Um, but this is like 4K in front of our eyes, and we're seeing the psychological design behind this genocide, and that's what's insane to me.
of course. Very intense.
So You were there for what? It was a total. Was it a month or is 3 weeks?
In total, it was 17 days.
17 days.
Yeah.
I want to go into probably some more uncomfortable details about testimonies of what you heard because, and I see this. I believe that this podcast serves two purposes. One is to allow our audience an insight into an analysis of a situation, but also as a historical record. And I was asking Dr. Atala what he heard about Al Shifa Hospital, the horrors that happened within that, because the world needs to know. And the problem with what happened at Al Shifa Hospital, it's somewhat of a mystery in the sense of like it's rumors or it's considered rumors. But I want to know what are the most atrocious things that you heard being there that the Israelis have done for the sake of just historical record, with you on the ground.
I mean, I did meet a survivor, a doctor from Shifa.
Mm-hmm.
He randomly came to the ICU, and the staff told me, they're like, "Do you know who this guy is?" And I said, "No." They're like, "He worked at Shifa Hospital. He was there until the end." So I spoke with him with a little time that he was there, and honestly, he wouldn't speak of what he saw. He said, "Whatever you guys have heard about Shifa is not even it doesn't even scratch the surface." He's like, "There is so many um, crimes that they committed at Shifa, but I don't want to speak about them." I guess one of the ICU doctors told me that one of his close colleagues was executed in front of him, and so he didn't want to get into it. So I don't know all the details that happened at Shifa, but I know it was bad. And I mean, I saw a man who survived and looked very traumatized from the experience that he saw there. Um, let's see, specific atrocities that were committed by the Israelis that I heard about. Trying to think specific stories. I mean, there's just a lot of like stories about targeting children, just evacuating them to these areas and being targeted. The lack, while we were entering Egypt, they were very strict about allowing tobacco. So like they completely did not want any tobacco getting in. So just as you talked about earlier, intentionality of all this, there is a very intentional uh, um, pursuit of literally just straight up torturing these people. There's people who've been
Yep.
smoking their entire lives, or they're so
Mm-hmm.
stressed out they need a cigarette and they can't
Yep.
get a packet. I know it may sound like small when you think
No,
about.
it's not.
um,
I have a nicotine addiction. I always have, my vape with me, and it's
yes.
actually I blame the Palestinians for that because the Palestinians are what when I was 18 years old, they got me addicted to nicotine because they would smoke like trains,
Exactly.
and every time I'm hanging out with them, it's a pack of cigarettes. So I was a pack and a half guy a day because of Palestinians. So to this day, I have a nicotine addiction thanks to Palestinians, and I blame it on them. But like you said, the thing,
Like,
it's
imagine
the little things
the little
that keep,
things.
like Palestinians, they have coping mechanisms, and I always list it like this: family, food, soccer, and cigarettes. Those are the
It's
coping
high up.
mechanisms of Palestinians.
Yes,
So
it's very high up, and so just that even small relief that they would get from a cigarette or a vape was being prevented. And the prices of cigarettes in Gaza is unbelievable. Like a pack, it's one cigarette they said is $10. So imagine a pack.
yeah,
Yeah. So yeah, it's just overall, pretty a horrific situation. I mean, as the invasion progressed while we were there, you could start see how things were getting more difficult. I remember seeing kids who would come in with very large jugs, like these huge bottles,
wow,
to fill water from the hospital supply, because the hospital usually has a steady supply of water. And I
yep,
was seeing that frequently. I saw even adults doing that. So that told me that they're having an issue getting water now. While they were
yeah,
there, and so I know all that has gotten worse. The evacuation areas that they're being told to get to go to are being smaller and smaller. They're being cut into smaller areas, and so more people are being crammed. There's just spread of these infectious diseases that we haven't
yep,
seen. And as mentioned, polio was eradicated 25 years ago from Gaza, and now they have a case and probably more cases. And
yep.
this is all just a consequence of this intentional attack on the healthcare system, the sanitation system, the infrastructure. Just mass suffering, intentional mass suffering is what they want.
Yeah, the cramming of people in a small area, when you really, and I feel like this is lost on the Western population of why that's happening and why they're doing that. It's so much by design. It's something that the Germans would have thought of cramming them into a small space so that the spread of disease can get rid of as many of them as possible. You know, um, and it's a good point that you made saying that, because a lot of people, you see it on social media that they're cramming into small spaces. Well, there's multiple reasons why that is. It's because when you have, under these conditions, people crammed in that small of a space, the disease can just is so conductive.
Of
You
course.
know,
Yeah. They were joking.
um,
They were joking. A lot of the staff was like, every other week they have diarrhea. A lot of the things, what they like to do is they like to show us pictures before the war and how much,
yeah,
just to show how much weight they've lost. They've said they've each lost about 15, 20 kilos. So like 30,
yeah,
40 pounds each. All of them have. And so, yeah, very intentional. One story I want to mention before I forget is like while we were there, you mentioned it. While we were there, there was a UN convoy. This was, after the invasion of Rafah. Uh, a UN convoy was sent to our hospital to evaluate the need to see if they can send more UN staff. And so these UN clearly marked trucks were on
yeah,
their way to our hospital, and they got attacked by tank shells, Israeli tank shells. And one truck was hit, and it killed a UN aid worker immediately. And his coworker who was right next to him in the car was injured, and they brought her into the ER. And so we were in the ICU, and one of the kids, just random kids in the hospital, he came up to me and said, "Hey, I heard one of your colleagues was killed." I said, "What?" He said, "Yeah, one of your colleagues was killed." And I said, "No way, I didn't hear." He said, "Come with me." So I went to the ER and I found this UN aid worker. She had a UN vest on. She was crying hysterically. She had a fracture in her arm, shrapnel wounds all over her neck, and she was just shell shocked. She was like in complete shock of what happened. And she was so close to sustaining life threatening wounds. I looked at her imaging of her body, and she had a shrapnel wound right next to the carotid, like so close. It's like just a few more centimeters would have
mm,
hit the carotid. But luckily, she survived. And I remember when I was walking out, I saw the UN cars. Like they all had UN, letters on them, flags. And so for me, that's when it got pretty real. That
yeah,
everyone is a potential target here in Gaza. No
yeah,
one is safe, even the UN foreign nationals. And I started thinking about the Western, sorry, not the Western, the World Central Kitchen disaster
yeah.
and crime. And so, yeah, I mean, it just goes to show you sort of the situation in Gaza and how they want to discourage anyone from coming by targeting everyone and making sure everyone knows that they could be a potential target.
Yeah, and Dr. Atala was mentioning that they specifically would target snipers would target doctors as a way of sending a message to all medical staff, like, "Hey, just abandon your people, abandon your duties." Did you hear stories about that?
While we were there, a nurse, her home was targeted. She was killed along with her family while we were there. And then since we left, there was also another nurse that was shot and killed. So yeah, I mean, healthcare workers they're no more safe than anyone else.
Yeah. Um, Now, talking about diseases, you were there in May. I know you keep track of how things are going on the ground now. What would you say are some of the biggest differences from when you were there in May to the situation now? Obviously, more buildings have been destroyed. The European hospital was shut down. What was the events that led to it being shut down by the Israelis, and what became of that hospital in detail, that you know of?
Sure. Yeah. So I mean, just comparing when I was there to the situation now, definitely, with Rafah being open previously, there were more things being allowed in. As I told you, we brought 10 suitcases, 10 pieces of luggage. They were allowing a little bit of aid in, so there was a better supply back during May. Since
Mhm.
the Rafah crossing was taken over, there's severe restrictions on what's allowed in. Now you have to go through Kerem Shalom crossing, and it's an Israeli crossing. And every medical person or doctor that goes is limited to 2 suitcases
Hmm.
instead of the 10 that I had, and no medical supplies. So it has to be personal items only. And the items that you bring can't have dual use. Like it has to just be specifically for one thing. And so they confiscate a lot of supplies, and so a lot of the supplies that we were bringing in, these teams that we're bringing in, that's not happening. And so a lot of the surgical supplies that were coming in stopped. So a lot of surgeries had to be postponed or delayed or even canceled. I know surgeons that were there afterwards who were struggling, trying to figure out how they're going to complete surgeries. They were reusing their tools. So the supply definitely has dwindled to very minimum now, and that includes everything: antibiotics, fluids, medications. So everything is very limited now, much worse than when I was there. And I remember in the ER, there'd be times where I'd be looking for IV fluid, like the most basic thing that you need in a hospital to resuscitate somebody, and I couldn't find fluid. Or I couldn't find a blood pressure cuff that worked to get a vital sign, get a blood pressure, an adequate blood pressure. So everything is much worse now. And yes, correct. The EGH, European Gaza Hospital, came under an evacuation order. So there, as I mentioned, it's in Khan Yunis. So that area of Khan Yunis was told to evacuate. So the whole hospital, all the staff, had to do their best to move patients. I was told a lot of stories where there were patients being pushed on beds, on patient beds for 7, 8 miles. They're pushing them in the middle because it happened late in the evening. They're just pushing them. Imagine this. There's also a story of a patient who ran out of oxygen, an intubated patient who ran out of oxygen and died, being transported to another hospital. So, the staff did their best to take all the equipment that they could and move it to Al-Aqsa Hospital or Nasser Hospital. But they couldn't take everything. It was limited time. And so the next day, after this sort of outcry of why is European Gaza Hospital being evacuated, there was a big social media push. We were calling all of our congressional reps and connections that we had as doctors. The Israelis authority, they clarified. They said, actually, yes, Khan Yunis was evacuated, but we didn't mean European Gaza Hospital. We didn't mean that. And that is despite the fact that there were doctors who got calls the day before being told to leave. Multiple doctors. And so it's like these mind games, these psychological torture that they're playing with the people of Gaza.
Yeah.
It's just unbelievable. They're torturing them every way that they can. And so yeah, it was shut down for about a month. And as the Israelis pulled out of Khan Yunis, they started trying to reopen the hospital, and they're in the process of actually reopening the hospital. They're saying hopefully by next week they're going to reopen the hospital. Right now, they're taking a very limited amount of cases. Literally yesterday, there was an 8-month-old that came in with a splenic laceration, liver injuries, explosive injuries. And so it's just a continued, it's like nothing changed. I mean, when I came here, nothing has changed. It's the same amount of cases every single day. Nothing changed for them.
Now, the the impending assault on Al-Aqsa, I can't find any solid updates on that or any real-time updates besides your occasional article from like CNN or
Yeah.
Reuters or something that just says that it's happening. What do you see coming out of that? What is the purpose of that? What are you hearing on the ground? I'm limited. I'm flying blind when it comes to
Yeah.
that situation.
Yeah, I mean, majority of media outlets, mainstream media outlets, are not covering what's happening. It's fallen to the bottom of the news sort of programming, Gaza in general. So I get most of my information from Twitter, journalists on the ground there, or direct WhatsApp messages from my friends that I have there. And what they told me is that Al-Aqsa Hospital there's no doctors left there. They evacuated it. It's completely evacuated. I did hear that there are still patients in there, but there's literally no staff. Is the last thing that I heard. What is the purpose? Just to already exacerbate, a horrific situation, humanitarian disaster. Al-Aqsa Hospital is a major hospital for central Gaza. And so taking away that hospital, that just leaves you with these small remaining field hospitals that can only do like first aid. They can't do complex surgeries. And it just puts pressure on the remaining hospitals that are barely functioning. So like I mentioned, European Gaza Hospital is trying to reopen. Now they're going to be under more stress to take patients. Nasser Hospital was shut down before us going on our trip. While we were there, it reopened slowly, and now I hear it's taken on a lot of patients as much as it can to accommodate. And this is just a few months after it reopening, and it was completely destroyed before. And so you keep seeing that, they destroy these hospitals, they destroy these institutions, but the Palestinians, despite their limited resources, will go clean it up as much as possible, try to get it functioning again. And so it's just an urge to survive, a determination to survive no matter what. And that's what they told me. They said, we're not leaving. These Israelis, they want us to leave. We're not going to leave
Mhm.
our land. We're either going to die here or we're going to live here and prosper here. And so they have no plans. I met Gazans in Egypt that fled the war, and they said, yeah, we're not staying in Egypt. As soon as the borders are open, we're going back. That's where
Yeah.
we want to live. That's where our futures are. So I don't see it, panning out for how the Israelis want to make this area very uninhabitable, so dangerous, so devastated that they want that the population will leave on its own. I don't see that happening.
That's that's interesting to hear your perspective on that, because it's such a testament to who they are, how indigenous they are. When you see Ben Gurion Airport packed to the brim, as if they were going through a major disaster right now, trying to escape because of a few rockets coming in from Hezbollah. Yeah, that's what Dr. Atallah's theme was too. He says, "I'm not leaving. I'm gonna stay here until this situation ends." He could go back. I mean, he could probably try to make it back to Egypt.
Yeah.
But he doesn't want to. Um,
It's true. And I heard a lot of stories of doctors having an ability to leave. And so some of them would take their families to Egypt and then they would come back. And they're like, no, we
mhm.
have to serve our population. Some didn't leave at all. Some would send their families. There were some that fled, of course, but there were also many that stayed.
What's the situation with leaving, though? What ability do Gazans have to leave, even if they want to? How does that work with the Israelis? And what's that process like? Because I feel like a lot of us are in the dark about that as well.
So previously, I mean, while I was, the Rafah crossing was open, there was medical reasons to leave. They would put in a request to seek treatment, and these requests could pend for several months. There were multiple stories of patients dying before their permits were approved, or even dying like a day before the permit was approved. And so that used to take a long time. Additionally, you could also buy your way out of Gaza if you had the funds, but they
It's
weren't.
like 10,000, right?
Yeah, $8,000 to $10,000 cash.
Jesus.
Imagine this, like, and they don't have anything near that. And
Yeah,
what would happen is they would pay. Some of them were able to collect funds. They would sell whatever they had, or they got the money somehow. And they would still have to wait, though. They'd wait a couple months, 3 months, and who knows if they would be killed during that time. And
exactly.
so that was the process. Some people were able to leave. I had a friend that was able to leave. He was able to pay his way out. And this is their life savings. I mean, obviously, there's no jobs. There's no people. People aren't getting paid in the past, genocide months of the genocide. Now it's even much more difficult. You have to leave through the Israeli crossing, so that requires coordination. That requires, I mean, to be honest, sorry, going back, I'm sure there was Israeli coordination before, while Rafah was open. I was told there was a list that the Israelis had to approve first before they would let anyone leave Gaza into Egypt.
Yeah.
So there's still that now, but now it's even more. It's tighter scrutiny and tighter sort of observation of who's allowed to leave, who's not. Right now, it's very strictly treatment, like humanitarian reasons only. There's been children who have been approved to leave to seek treatment outside of Gaza, but like their mother or their family member would be denied. So they're sending these severely injured 8-year-olds out by themselves, and it's just again another intentional way to punish the people of Gaza. Like, okay, you want to leave, you can leave, but the mom has to stay behind.
Mhm.
Yeah.
How is like coming back to the States? How different are you?
It felt like a different world. I mean, I'll tell you. So we were evacuated from Gaza by the U.S. embassy. So they we left through the Karam Abu Saddam crossing, the Israeli crossing, and then as soon as we got through the crossing, we were met by U.S. embassy staff. And as soon as we were met, it was like immediate safety. They gave us these huge water bottles. They put us in this air conditioned van, and they started playing like American music, country music, and it felt just like I felt an immediate sense of safety and
Hmm.
comfort. And honestly, I just like had a meltdown in the car. I was just like I felt so guilty. I was like
Yep.
17 days of Gaza, and then I'm treated like this. Like, what about these people who have for
Yep.
months been going through this, and they still haven't tasted 1 second of comfort at all? And so I remember that was just so hard to accept that. And why? Like, I'm Palestinian, so I have family that's in the West Bank. I could have easily been, any one of them. Just I could have been in Palestine, sort of living under occupation, and instead I was blessed to be born in America, and so I'm treated like completely different, and I'm given this privilege and this comfort just because I'm an American. So that was really hard to accept. I
Hmm.
mean, it was very frustrating just knowing, honestly, while I was there, just knowing these are American weapons, American bullets, like that are killing these kids. And I remember I was so frustrated there. It's like, why is this happening? How does this benefit America? Why are these kids being killed with American weapons? For what reason? And that was frustrating as an American. And they told and the people of Gaza, they told me, they're like, look, when you go back, just tell our stories, please, just tell our stories. Keep talking about us, telling our stories. And one thing that was giving them hope while I was there, it was when there was a lot of student encampments here back home,
Yep.
and they were following so closely. They're like, look, we actually, they told me, multiple people, we actually think this is going to change our status. This is going to change the situation for us. And so when I got back, that was one of the first things I asked. I was like, what happened? Where are the encampments? What's going on? And I was sad to see like a lot of them got cleared out. But our duty continues. Like nothing, as I mentioned, has changed for them. The bombs are still falling. Kids are being killed
Hmm.
every single hour. And
Yep.
so it's our duty to keep talking about them, telling their stories, putting pressure on our government to end this, because it doesn't benefit America. It doesn't benefit the Palestinians, the Israelis. Nobody's benefiting from this. And it's an extreme loss of life. And it's all kids that I was seeing. And so it needs to end. And so I just really hope that anyone listening will just continue to be active in trying to end this thing as much as they can.
Me too. And I do believe that it will continue. In fact, I believe this is going to be an entire new demographic and community that will live on within the United States, within the Western world, and in the world. I think that the pro Palestinian movement is going to galvanize into something that nobody saw coming in history. I really think it's going to turn into something just beyond an anti war movement or an anti genocide movement. It is going to turn into a revolutionary demographic that will continue to grow and become its own force of nature. Um,
Hope so.
and with every child that we see killed in Gaza, will be further fuel on that fire within on this planet.
Of course.
You know,
Yeah.
and what's interesting about Gazans, this is the most goddamn. This really does hit you hard. Gazans, as opposed to a lot of people who've been in bad situations, they are not bitter at people who are living well. They're happy for them. And I've realized that in talking with them is that they're not like, "Oh, well, you're living well, so fuck you. I hope some bad shit happens to you." No, it's like Gazans are like, "I am glad people outside of this hell are living good lives." And they're not asking for revenge on us who are living in comfort. They just want us to speak up for them.
Yeah.
And they hope that the people who are speaking up for them have good lives, even if they don't. It's a very selfless way of looking at life,
So,
despite what they're going through. And I'm just like,
yeah.
damn, if I were them, I would want the whole goddamn world to burn.
It's true. It's true. And even while we
You
were,
know?
yeah, while we were there, like they see the goodness in anything. While I was there and we were in the ICU working, one of the doctors was like, Alhamdulillah, or God praised this war. I was like, what? And he's like, yeah, because it allowed us to meet you, meet these doctors from abroad to come who came risk their lives to stand with us. And I was just like, man, like how could you even see the blessing in this war? Just he's like, yeah, we got to meet our brothers, we got to meet you guys, and I was just like, man, these people are so different. Exactly. I would be so enraged and depressed. 8 months of bombs and people dying all over me, and my home is being destroyed. And the future, no future. Like a lot of these medical students, their universities are destroyed. They don't know how they're going to finish their degrees. Are they going to graduate? What's going to happen? Kids are being killed all around, and it's like, how do these people have this mindset or this just persona of seeing the good in the most horrific situations?
I know. It always inspires me.
Yeah.
Going back to faith for just a second. Whenever I talk to somebody in Gaza, I always make it a point to ask them which surah drives them, right? And because it's a selfish reason because I want that inspiration from them. But B, I realize how much joy it gives them to talk about it because in a lot of ways, that's the only, like, that's all they want to talk about. It's the only thing that they can hold on to. So when you were there, if there's one surah that you could think of that, or a phrase that you heard quoted that besides the one of like saving a life is to save a world, and which one can you bring up to mind that stood out to you when you were there?
Yeah, I mean, the one statement that is sort of unanimously stated by the people of Gaza, or you hear continuously, is "Hasbi Allah wa ni'mal wakeel." God is sufficient for me, and He's the best provider. And so they would say this
Yeah.
after seeing loved ones killed in front of them, their homes destroyed, and so just saying that statement, it automatically resets their brain. Like, okay, that's fine, but God is enough for me, and He's the one that can provide for me. So He will
Hmm.
take care of me. So it gives them
Yeah.
immediate comfort. And so you heard that statement over and over again, and that was from the oldest to the youngest. We're saying that statement, and even if
Has that statement taken on new meaning for you now that you're back in the
I mean, of
States?
course, I mean that's yeah, I mean that's on social media, there's so many videos of hearing Gazans say this statement. And so,
Mhm.
when there's any difficulty in my life, I try to say that statement or just remember, okay, let's try to bring it down here. How important or how difficult is the situation? And just
Yeah.
remind us that God is enough for us and He will provide for us. And so it's just kind of like it gives you a sense of optimism. Like no matter how difficult the situation, there's always that reminder that God will take care of you and He's the best, He's the sustainer for all of us. So yeah, that was something that was being repeated amongst them.
Yeah. Thanks for sharing that. A lot I would like to talk to you about. I know you're busy though. Anything else you want to say, reflect on? The floor is yours, man.
Yeah, no, I just appreciate you for having me on and having these other guests on to talk about Gaza. As I said, this is what they wanted us to do, to keep telling their stories.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, the mainstream media it fell off and it's not one of the top stories, but we need to keep talking about it. We are 100% complicit as Americans, whether we like it or not. We are funding this genocide. This can all end with one phone call. And unfortunately, it doesn't seem like the new administration, whether it be Kamala or Trump, is going to make any big change to the situation. Um,
No.
yeah, and I just wish that sort of the Democratic Party right now took the uncommitted movement more serious, took the Palestinian Arab vote more serious, as far as sort of changing course on what's happening right now, because it seems like, at least even locally, my local congressional reps that I've been calling, going to their offices, requesting meetings, we're just being ignored, man,
Yeah.
and being told the repeated statements, Israel has the right to defend itself. And I met with my congressman. I'll call him out, Congressman Lou Correa of Santa Ana. And I sat with him. Actually, I'm sorry. I'll take a step back. So I requested meetings with him. We did as a community to discuss his previous stances on Israel, on Gaza, and he declined them every time. So when I came back, I said, you know what? I want to meet with him because he while we were there, he ended up reaching out to the State Department to ask about sort of ensuring our safe exit. So he put in some effort. So I told him, the office, you know what, I want to thank him. Can I come by? And they said, sure, of course. Like when the congressman wants to be thanked, he's welcome. Anyone is welcome in. But like when we want to actually hold him to his policies, we're not allowed. So anyway, he let us he met with me and my wife, and I took pictures of some of the kids that I was treating, and told them personal stories of what I saw, and it was like talking to a wall. He said, "You know what? I want you to go back to the Palestinians."
1 second. No,
Yeah,
keep going. Keep going. I'm going to mute myself. Keep
sure,
going.
sure. I want you to go back to the Palestinians, and I want you to tell them that they need to provide a partner for peace, as if I was sort of the representation of all the Palestinians. And he was trying to put the blame on the Palestinians for this war. And I told him, look, Lou, there are American weapons that are actively killing these kids every single day. Like, why can't me and you just focus on that? Why don't we stop funding the slaughter of children? And he said, look, we're going to agree to disagree, but Israel has the right to protect itself. And I gave him the packet of pictures that I had of the children, and he was not interested at all. And so that was just kind of the general feeling that we are getting from the Democratic Party, is that we are being ignored. It appears that Palestinian lives are not of value to them, despite our complicity, despite the American taxpayer dollars paying for all of this. They're not interested, and they're going to continue with the same statements, the same stances that they've had before, and that is supporting Israel despite the atrocities, the war crimes. Congressman Lou Correa signed off on a letter criticizing the ICC case looking into genocide in in Gaza. He also sent a letter to Blinken demanding that he didn't allow the arrest warrants, the I think it was ICC or ICJ arrest warrants for Netanyahu to go through. So he's been actively playing a role in defending this genocide and backing the Israeli war criminals. And so that's why I wanted to meet with him specifically. And I'm hoping that the Democratic Party takes a different approach, because right now we're feeling ignored despite our relatives being slaughtered every single day, and it's not acceptable.
I would expect nothing less from the Democratic Party, and that's just my personal take, not to get political, but the Democratic Party is doing exactly what it's always been doing throughout the years. They're following their pattern, in my opinion, and I know this is controversial, and there's a somewhat of division within the movement about Democrats and um, holding out some type of hope that maybe we can put pressure on them and they'll even. But it's like based on their behavior and ever since the Clinton era, when it comes to war and when it comes to supplying weapons to people that we should not be supplying weapons to, there's no difference. There's not going to be any change. So I'm not going to hope in something that, what they say about insanity is, or, doing the same thing over and over again and expecting different results. That's the
Sure,
Democratic Party. My opinion, they're a racist party.
sure,
They don't care about they don't care about people like Palestinians. Let's just say that,
of course.
with their melanin complexion. Let's just say that.
Yeah, it's
I
becoming clear. It's true. I think we have to all come to that realization that you have.
I do too. Glad you said that, because and again I say this respectfully with people who have different political viewpoints or political hopes. I'll always leave room for respect of how certain people feel. This is my opinion, and this is not the opinion of Colonial Outcast. Even this is just me
Mhm.
talking. That we, I believe that we're going through the shock period as a society. And like I did a video about this, saying that what our faith in the political system and what we're going through right now is very similar to the phases of grief. The phases of grief is first denial. You don't your brain cannot comprehend that you lost a loved one. In this case, the loved one is the government that we thought was mommy and daddy that takes care of us and is always looking out for the best. So because we're going through these phases of grief, a lot of us are stuck in the denial and shock phase, where we cannot comprehend the fact that maybe our government is, regardless of the party, is just evil to the core, and they have no intention of doing anything good. So I think that's where we're at as a society. People are stuck in that denial phase and in the shock. And I believe that we, like you said, we need to get over that shock and come up with an alternative route and just already start thinking on the lines of plan B. And that's my personal opinion on it, when it comes to politics. But yeah, I really appreciate you going out there to Gaza. It says a lot about you as a doctor, leaving the safety of California. You and I are not too far away from each other. I mean, I don't know about you, but California has definitely spoiled me since moving from the East Coast. I've become such a pansy since I came out here. I'm not. It's still, you got the weather here. You got this, and especially having kids. You have 4 kids,
Two,
right?
two.
Oh, 2 kids. Yeah. You having kids and then going to a place like Gaza for your people who are suffering, is a testament about you. And it's and I can't imagine you seeing children face to face suffering these injuries and dying in front of you and not seeing your own child amongst those kids. And that, you know that's what I see every time I see a kid in Gaza. I just think of my kid.
Yeah,
I think of what that parent is going through right now, the horror, and then having to continue to move on, continue to survive. I'd hang myself.
yeah,
I'll just be straight up honest. I would hang myself if that happened.
yeah.
And but they don't. They push on because of their faith, and it's insane, man. Um, well, brother, I hope to talk to you in the future soon. I really appreciate you taking time out of your day, especially as a doctor here in California and in LA. I know you're a busy guy, and thanks for speaking up for the Gazan people. Sometime I want to talk to you about the West Bank too. Share memories about that. But yeah, brother.
Thanks so much for
With
your time. I appreciate it. All your work, man. Seriously, keep it up, and thank you for inviting me.
Yeah, I'm trying. Well, anyways, please, everybody, direct your prayers and direct your voices for Gaza, and the news. Follow the news of Al-Aqsa Hospital, and support Dr. Altala and his work over there, and be mindful always of every update you can with Gaza. And thank you for listening to this. With that, we're going to sign out right now.